Lightning has struck Pseudopod Towers once again, and, as every week, something horrifying slouches towards your ears, waiting to be heard. What follows is horror to the core. Proceed only if you wish to be disturbed as well as entertained.
PseudoPod, episode 925 for June 21st, 2024. What Every Young Ghoul Should Know, and Black Bargain, by Robert Bloch. Narrated by Rish Outfield and Lehman Kessler. Hosted by Kat Day, with audio production by Chelsea Davis. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing okay. I'm Kat, assistant editor at PseudoPod, your host for this week, and this is our 925th episode, which admittedly is not quite as round a number as 1000, but a milestone is a milestone, right? So for this week, we've got not one, but two stories for you. What Every Young Ghoul Should Know, which is very short, and Black Bargain, which is a bit longer. Both by Robert Bloch. Robert Bloch was an American fiction writer, primarily of crime, psychological horror, and fantasy. He's best known as the writer of Psycho, 1959, the basis for the film of the same name by Alfred Hitchcock, but he wrote hundreds of short stories and over 30 novels. He won the Hugo Award, the Bram Stoker Award, and the World Fantasy Award. He served a term as president of the Mystery Writers of America and was a member of that organisation and of the Science Fiction Writers of America, the Writers Guild of America, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, and the Count Dracula Society. Busy guy. Your starter, or appetizer, for this episode is What Every Young Ghoul Should Know, which was originally published in Amateur Correspondent, September-October 1937. And your narrator for this story is Rish Outfield. Rish is a writer, voice actor, and audiobook narrator. He got his start co-hosting the Dune Steef audio fiction magazine and That Gets My Goat podcasts, where he and Big Anklevich attempt to waste time entertainingly. He also features his own stories on the Rish Outcast podcast. He once got a job because of his Sean Connery impersonation, but has lost two due to his Samuel L. Jackson impression. He's currently crowdfunding for Waiting for October, a new audio drama, and we'll put the link in the show notes. And now, we have a very small story for you. And we promise you, it's true.
What Every Young Ghoul Should Know, by Professor Robert Blockhead, former tutor to the President of the United Cigar Stores. On March 12th, F. Orland Tremendous disappeared. He was the editor of Flabby Stories, so it might have been for the best. Still, it was strange. The following morning marked the unaccountable vanishing of Leo Margulaus, editor of Monstrous Yarns, and Hugo Tehelenbach, pilot of Asinine Tales. Immediately, the fantasy world became greatly excited, although it must be admitted that nobody else gave a particular damn. When, on March 14th, several other editors disappeared, the world was agog. Farnsworth Wrong, editor of Worried Tales, and Mort Weisenheimer of the staff of Awful and Putrid were both missing. Even Corwin F. Stinky, infant editor of the fan magazine The Chorus Pondent, now combined with pleurisy, had vanished. To make a long story worse, and all seriousness aside, every fantasy editor in the country was gone. They were not at home, nor at the office, nor in a Turkish bath. Searchers turned away from the morgue, disappointed. It was a 9 days wonder in the world of pulp magazines. Then new editors were appointed for the fantasy books by a group of competent alienists, and the old were gradually and gratefully forgotten. But meanwhile, the 6 errant editors were still alive and, like all editors, kicking. But where were they? Guess. No, that's wrong. And besides, it isn't nice. Guess again. No. Give up? I thought so, you dumb cluck. They were on the moon. How did they get there? I sent them there. Yes, I. As I write these lines, I am gloating. Maybe I'm bloating. Anyway, I sent them. My motive? Revenge. The month before, I submitted a story to Farnsworth Wrong entitled A Journey to the Moon by Canoe and Wiffle Board. He rejected it as impossible. Mr. Stinky even had the nerve to declare that a trip to the moon is impossible and you know it. Such crust, and in science fiction, too. When I received my last rejection slip, I saw red. It was a blue slip, so I went to the oculist. He prescribed glasses, so I went into a tavern and had several. It was there that my idea was born. I would get revenge. A trip to the moon impossible, eh? And they rejected my masterpuss, my 53-word story over which I had sweated so many months. It's about time you took a bath, blockhead. Who said that? The money from my story was going to send me through Harvard. I guess I went mad. 4. I kidnapped the editors. Wrong was the first. I caught him with a butterfly net. Then I sprinkled salt on the tails of Margalaus and Tehellenbach. Under the name of Albert Einstein, I was admitted to see Corwin Stinky. He thought I was a fan of his. I was, fanning him with a club, and the rest were just as easy. Bundling the 6 unconscious editors into my car, I drove back to Milwaukee. Here, in my basement, lay the rocket ship. Perhaps those of you who are interested in the more technical scientific details of spaceflight will be interested in how I constructed this great machine. 2 interesteds in the same sentence sounds bad, I know, but I couldn't think of a synonym for interested, and Clark Ashton Smith has my dictionary. For your benefit, the procedure was as follows. I got together a lot of stuff and tore it apart with some tools. Then I built a sort of thing with wheels on the side and stuck a mess of wire someplace so that the whatchamacallit wouldn't, when I pushed too hard on the jiggers. After that, I constructed something very much like an airplane, only instead of wings, I had several mechanisms instead of the wheels I would have used if I were only building a pair of roller skates. Then, of course, all I had to do was put in my levers, adjust my dials, and change my oil every 2,000 miles. It rhymes, don't it? I also see my dentist twice a year. Anyhow, that's how I built the rocket. I did a pretty good job of it, if I do say so myself, and I'm the only one who will say so. And there it was, affectionate sigh, my rocket. Operated by atomic generators, electricity, gas, maid service, and towels free of charge, it was ready to leave. Cleverly, I placed my 6 helpless passengers in the space ship, as I brilliantly called it. The nose of the great rocket zoomed upwards and disappeared right through the 1st and 2nd stories of the house, leaving quite a nasty hole. Even today we have to walk around it in our living room. But the rocket was gone. Through a telescope I borrowed, I followed its flight, saw it land on the moon's surface. Eagerly I sat at my radio set, which I'd borrowed, for the next 3 days. It was attached by a special hookup to the sending set in the cabin of the rocket. Would I hear anything? Finally, one night, it came.
"Hey,"
said a voice.
"now looky here, Amos."
Well, I turned the dials to another place.
"Hey there."
It came again. Ah, it was the voice of Leo Margalaus.
"Is that you, Block? You rat? This is us, on the moon."
I chuckled, twirling my mustache. I anticipated his next words, how they were starving up there on that desolate orb, lonely, bewildered, frightened, 6 sad editors face to face with the terrifying reality of lunar solitude. The voice spoke.
See here, Block. We've been talking to the natives, and I want to thank you for what you did by sending us here. Next month, we're bringing out the first issue of Colossal Stories, featuring thought variants under a new policy. Freddie Tremendous is starting a series called Is There Life on Earth? And I'm doing a column on man's brain, if any. You'd love it up here, boy. The natives are all great science fiction fans. They have 6 heads, you know. That means they can read 6 fantasy magazines at once. What a field! Tailendback and Stinky are having great fun jumping into bottomless craters and coming out on the other side of the moon. Don't worry about us. We'll try to send you down our first issue. Goodbye now.
The radio voice was silent. I sat aghast. I'm always a little aghast after meals. A fine revenge this turned out to be. I send them to the moon and they immediately start science fiction magazines up there. It just goes to show how uncooperative some people will be. So I have decided to confess. It does not matter any more. I caused their disappearance. Let the police come now. They cannot find me. No, they cannot find me. You see, I'm not really here. And besides, I hung myself 20 minutes ago.
Your main course, entree? I've never understood that one. It means entrance. It should be the starter. Anyway, for this episode is Black Bargain, which was originally published in Weird Tales, May 1942. And your narrator for this story is Lehman Kessler. Lehman Kessler is a Nigerian-born American actor who since 2010 has been performing as H.P. Lovecraft on stage, film and in his popular web series advice show, Ask Lovecraft. In between being a dad and a village mayor, he can be heard regularly on his pop culture podcast Geekily Yoked and on his sci-fi drama Moonbase Theatre Out. To find out more, go to www.lehmankessler.com. And now, we have a bigger story for you. And we promise you, it really, really is true.
Black Bargain by Robert Bloch. Narrated by Lehman Kessler. It was getting late when I switched off the neon and got busy behind the fountain with my silver polish. The fruit syrup came off easily, but the chocolate stuck and the hot fudge was greasy. I wished to the devil they wouldn't order hot fudge. I began to get irritated as I scrubbed away. 5 hours on my feet every night, and what did I have to show for it? Varicose veins. Varicose veins and the memory of 1,000 foolish faces. The veins were easier to bear than the memories. They were so depressing, those customers of mine. I knew them all by heart. In early evening, all I got was Cokes. I could spot the Cokes a mile away. Giggling high school girls with long shocks of uncombed brown hair, with their shapeless tan fingertip coats and their repulsively thick legs bulging over furry red ankle socks. They were all Cokes. For 45 minutes, they'd monopolize a booth, messing up the tiled tabletop with cigarette ashes, crushed napkins daubed in lipstick, and little puddles of spilled water. Whenever a high school girl came in, I automatically reached for the cola pump. A little later in the evening, I got the "Give me 2 packs" crowd. Sport shirts hanging limply over hairy arms meant the popular brands. Blue work shirts with rolled sleeves disclosing tattooing meant the 2 for $1 cigarettes. Once in a while, I got a fat boy. He was always a cigar. If he wore glasses, he was a 10-center. If not, I merely had to indicate the box on the counter. 5 cents straight, mild Havana, all long filler. Oh, it was monotonous. The Notions family, who invariably departed with aspirin, X-Lax, candy bars, and a pint of ice cream. The public library crowd, tall, skinny youths spinning the pages of magazines on the rack and never buying. The soda waters with their trousers wrinkled by the sofa of a one-room apartment. The hairpins always looking furtively toward the baby buggy outside. and around 10, the pineapple sundaes, fat women bingo players, followed by the chocolate sodas when the show let out. More booth parties, giggling girls, and red-necked young men in sloppy playsuits. In and out all day long, the rushing telephones, the doddering old 3-cent stamps, the bachelor toothpastes and razor blades. I could spot them all at a glance. Night after night, they dragged up to the counter. I don't know why they even bothered to tell me what they wanted. One look was all I needed to anticipate their slightest wishes. I could have given them what they needed without their asking. Or rather, I suppose I couldn't, because what most of them really needed was a good long drink of arsenic as far as I was concerned. Arsenic. Good Lord, how long had it been since I've been called upon to fill out a prescription? None of these stupid idiots wanted drugs from a drugstore. Why'd I bother to study pharmacy? All I really needed was a 2-week course in pouring chocolate syrup over melting ice cream and a month's study of how to set up cardboard figures in the window so as to emphasize their enormous busts. Well. He came in then. I heard the slow footsteps without bothering to look up. For amusement, I tried to guess before I glanced. Give me 2 packs, a toothpaste. Well, the hell with him, I was closing up. The male footsteps had shuffled up to the counter before I raised my head. They halted timidly. I still refused to give any recognition of his presence. Then came a hesitant cough. That did it. I found myself staring at Casper Milquetoast and Nearly Rags, a middle-aged, thin little fellow with sandy hair and rimless glasses perched on a snub nose. The crease of his froggish mouth underlined the despair of his face. He wore a frayed $16.50 suit, a wrinkled white shirt, and a string tie. But humility was his real garment. It covered him completely, that aura of hopeless resignation. To hell with psychoanalysts. I'm not the drugstore Dale Carnegie. What I saw added up to only one thing in my mind. A moocher.
I beg your pardon, please, but have you any tincture of aconite?
Well, miracles do happen. I was going to get a chance to sell drugs after all. Or was I? When despair walks in and asks for aconite, it means suicide. I shrugged. Aconite? I echoed. I don't know. He smiled a little, or rather that crease wrinkled back in a poor imitation of amusement. But on his face a smile had no more mirth in it than the grin you see on a skull.
I know what you're thinking, he mumbled, but you're wrong. I'm a chemist. I'm doing some experiments, and I must have 4 ounces of aconite at once. And some belladonna, yes. And wait a minute.
Then he dragged the book out of his pocket. I craned my neck, and it was worth it. The book had rusty metal covers and was obviously very old. When the thick yellow pages fluttered open under his trembling thumb, I saw flecks of dust rise from the binding. The heavy black letter type was German, but I couldn't read anything at that distance.
Let me see now, he murmured. Aconite, belladonna. Yes, and I have this, the cat, of course, a nightshade. Oh yes, I'll need some phosphorus, of course. Have you any blue chalk? Good, and I guess that's all.
I was beginning to catch on. What the devil did it matter to me? A screwball more or less was nothing new in my life. All I wanted to do was get out of here and soak my feet. I went back and got the stuff for him, quickly. I peered through the slot above the prescription counter, but he wasn't doing anything, just paging through that black iron-bound book and moving his lips. Wrapping the parcel, I came out. Anything else, sir?
Oh, yes. Could I have about a dozen candles, the large size?
I opened a drawer and scrabbled for them under the dust.
I'll have to melt them down and reblend them with the fat, he said.
What?
Nothing. I was just figuring.
Sure. That's the kind of figuring you do best when you're counting the pads in your cell. But it wasn't my business, was it? So I handed over the package like a fool.
Thank you. You've been very kind. I must ask you to be kinder, to charge this.
Oh, well.
You see, I'm temporarily out of funds, but I can assure you in a very short time, in fact, within 3 days, I shall pay you in full. Yes.
A very convincing plea. I wouldn't give him a cup of coffee on it, and that's what bums usually ask for, instead of aconite and candles. But if his words didn't move me, his eyes did. They were so lonely behind his spectacles, so pitifully alone. Those 2 little puddles of hope in the desert of despair that was his face. All right. Let him have his dreams. Let him take his old iron-bound dream book home with him and make him crazy. let him light his tapers and draw his phosphorescent circle and recite his spells to Little Wahoo, the Indian guide of the spirit world, or whatever the hell he wanted to do. No, I wouldn't give him coffee, but I'd give him a dream. That's okay, buddy, I said. We're all down on our luck sometime, I guess. That was wrong. I shouldn't have patronized. He stiffened at once, and his mouth curled into a sneer of superiority, if you please. I'm not asking charity, he said. You'll get paid, never fear, my good man. In 3 days, mark my words. Now, good evening. I have work to do. Out he marched, leaving my good man with his mouth open. Eventually, I closed my mouth, but I couldn't clamp a lid on my curiosity. That night, walking home, I looked down the dark street with new interest. The black houses bulked like a barrier behind which lurked fantastic mysteries. Row upon row, not houses anymore, but dark dungeons of dreams. In what house did my stranger hide? In what room was he intoning to what strange gods? Once again I sensed the presence of wonder in the world, of lurking strangeness behind the scenes of drugstore and apartment house civilization. Black books still were read, and wild-eyed strangers walked and muttered. Candles burned into the night, and a missing alley cat might mean a chosen sacrifice. But my feet hurt, so I went home. Same old malted milks, cherry cokes, Vaseline, Listerine, hairnets, bathing caps, cigarettes, and what have you. Me, I had a headache. It was 4 days later, almost the same time of night, when I found myself scrubbing off the soda taps again. Sure enough, he walked in. I kept telling myself all evening that I didn't expect him. But I did expect him, really. I had that crawling feeling when the door clicked. I waited for the shuffle of the Tom McCann shoes. Instead, there was a brisk tapping of Oxfords. English Oxfords. The $18.50 kind. I looked up in a hurry this time. It was my stranger. At least, he was there, someplace beneath the flashy blue pinstripe of his suit, the immaculate shirt and fuller tie. He'd had a shave, a haircut, a manicure, and evidently a winning ticket in the Irish sweepstakes. Hello there. Nothing wrong with that voice. I'd heard in the ritzy hotel lobby for years, brimming over with pep and confidence and authority. Well, 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 was all I could say. He chuckled. His mouth wasn't a crease anymore. It was a trumpet of command. Out of that mouth could come orders and directions. This wasn't a mouth shaped for hesitant excuses any longer. It was a mouth for requesting expensive dinners, choice vintage wines, heavy cigars, a mouth that barked at taxi drivers and doormen. Surprised to see me, eh? Well, I told you it would take 3 days. Want to pay you your money. Thank you for your kindness. That was nice. Not the thanks. The money. I like money. The thought of getting some I didn't expect made me genial. So your prayers were answered, eh? I said. He frowned. Prayers? What prayers? Why, I thought that I'd pulled a boner, no mistake. I don't understand, he snapped, understanding perfectly well. Did you perhaps harbor some misapprehension concerning my purchases of the other evening? A few necessary chemicals, that's all, to complete the experiment I spoke of. And the candles. I must confess were to light my room. They shut my electricity off the day before. Well, it could be. I might as well tell you the experiment was a howling success. Yes, sir. Went right down to Newsom with the results, and they put me on as assistant researcher director. Quite a break. Newsom was the biggest chemical supply house in our section of the country. And he went right down in his rags and was put on as assistant research director. Well, live and learn. So here's the money. $2.39, wasn't it? Can you change a 20? I couldn't. That's all right. Keep it. I refused. I don't know why. Made me feel crawling again somehow. Well then, tell you what let's do. You're closing up, aren't you? Why not step down the street to the tavern for a little drink? I'll get changed there. Come on, I feel like celebrating. So it was that 5 minutes later I walked down the street with Mr. Fritz Gulther. We took a table in the tavern and ordered quickly. Neither he nor I was at ease. Somehow there was an unspoken secret between us. It seemed almost as though I harbored criminal knowledge against him. I, of all men, alone knowing that behind this immaculately clad figure of success there lurked a shabby spectre just 3 days in the past, a spectre that owed me $2.39. We drank quickly, both of us. The spectre got a little fainter. We had another. I insisted on paying for the third round. It's a celebration, I argued. He laughed. Certainly is. And let me tell you, this is only the beginning. Only the beginning.
From now on, I'm going to climb so fast it'll make your head swim. I'll be running that place within 6 months. Going to get a lot of new defense orders in from the government and expand.
Wait a minute, I cautioned, reserve gone. You're way ahead of yourself. If I were in your shoes, I'd still be dazed with what happened to me in the past 3 days.
Fritz Gulther smiled. Oh, that. I expected that. Didn't I tell you so in the store? I've been working for over a year, and I knew just what to expect. It was no surprise, I assure you. I had it all planned. I was willing to starve to carry out my necessary studies, and I did starve. Might as well admit it.
Sure. I was on my 4th drink now, over the barriers. When you came into the store, I said to myself, here's a guy who's been through hell.
Truer words were never spoken, said Gulther. I've been through hell, all right, quite literally, but it's all over now, and I didn't get burned.
Say, confidentially, what kind of magic did you use?
Magic? Magic? I don't know anything about magic.
Oh, yes, you do, Gulther, I said. What about that little black book with the iron covers you were mumbling around with in the store?
German inorganic chemistry text, he snapped. Pretty old. Here, drink up and have another.
I had another. Gulther began to babble a bit about his new clothes and his new apartment and the new car he was going to buy next week, about how he was going to have everything he wanted now. By God, he'd show the fools that laughed at him all these years. He'd pay back the nagging landladies and the cursing grocers and the sneering rats who told him he was soft in the head for studying the way he did. Then he got into the kindly stage. How'd you like a job at Newsom? He asked me. You're a good pharmacist, you know your chemistry. You're a nice enough fella, too, but you've got a terrible imagination. How about it? Be my secretary. Sure, that's it. Be my secretary. I'll put you on tomorrow. I'll drink on that, I declared. The prospect intoxicated me. The thought of escape from the damn store, escape from the coke faces, the ciggy voices, very definitely intoxicated me. So did the next drink. I began to see something. We were sitting against the wall, and the tavern lights were low. Couples around us were babbling in monotone and was akin to silence. We sat in shadow against the wall. Now I looked at my shadow, an ungainly, flickering character of myself, hunched over the table. What a contrast it presented before his suddenly erect bulk. His shadow now. His shadow now. I saw it. He was sitting up straight across the table from me, but his shadow on the wall was standing. No more scotch for me, I said as the waiter came up. But I continued to stare at his shadow. He was sitting and the shadow was standing. It was a larger shadow than mine and a blacker shadow. For fun, I moved my hands up and down, making heads and faces in silhouette. He wasn't watching me. He was gesturing to the waiter. His shadow didn't gesture. It just stood there. I watched and stared and tried to look away. His hands moved, but the black outline stood poised and silent, hands dangling at the sides, and yet I saw the familiar shape of his head and nose, unmistakably his. Say, Gulther, I said, your shadow there on the wall. I slurred my words. My eyes were blurred, but I felt his attitude pierce my consciousness below the alcohol. Fritz Gulther rose to his feet and then shoved a dead white face against mine. He didn't look at his shadow. He looked at me, through me, at some horror behind my face, my thoughts, my brain. He looked at me and into some private hell of his own. Shadow, he said. There's nothing wrong with my shadow. You're mistaken. Remember that. You're mistaken. And if you ever mention it again, I'll bash your skull in. Then Fritz Gulther got up and walked away. I watched him march across the room, moving swiftly but a little unsteadily. Behind him, moving very slowly and not a bit unsteadily, a tall black shadow followed him from the room. If you can build a better mousetrap than your neighbor, you're liable to put your foot in it. That's certainly what I had done with Gulther. Here I was, ready to accept his job offer of a good job as his secretary, and I had to go and pull a drunken boner. I was still cursing myself for a fool 2 days later. Shadows that don't follow body movements, indeed. Who was that shadow I saw you with last night? That was no shadow, that was the scotch I was drinking. Oh, fine. So I stood in the drugstore and sprinkled my sundaes with curses as well as chopped nuts. I nearly knocked the pecans off the counter that second night when Fritz Gulther walked in again. He hurried to the counter and flashed me a tired smile. Got a minute to spare? Well, sure. Wait till I serve these people in the booth. I dumped the sundaes and raced back. Gulther perched himself on a stool and took off his hat. He was sweating profusely.
Say, I want to apologize for the way I blew up the other night.
Why, that's all right, Mr. Gulther.
I got a little too excited, that's all. Liquor and success went to my head. No hard feelings. I want you to understand that. It's just that I was nervous. You're ribbing me about my shadow. That stuff sounded too much like the way I was always kidded for sticking to my studies in my room. Landlady used to accuse me of all sorts of things. Claim I dissected her cat, that I was burning incense, messing the floor up with chalk. Some damn fool college punks downstairs began to yap around that I was some kind of nut dabbling in witchcraft.
I wasn't asking for his autobiography, remember? All this sounded a bit hysterical. But then Gulther looked the part. His sweating, the way his mouth wobbled and twitched as he got this out of me.
But say, the reason I stopped in was to say if you could mix me up a sedative. No bromo or aspirin. I've been taking plenty of that stuff ever since the other evening. My nerves are all shot. That job of mine at Newsom takes it all out of me.
Wait a minute. I'll get something. I made for the back room. As I compounded, I sneaked a look at Gulther through the slot. All right, I'll be honest. It wasn't Gulther I wanted to look at. It was his shadow. I blinked, but that didn't help. When a customer sits at the counter stools, the store lights hit him so that his shadow is just a little black pool beneath his feet. Gulther's shadow was a complete silhouette of his body and outline. A black, deep shadow. I blinked, but that didn't help. Stranger still, the shadow seemed to be cast parallel with his body instead of at an angle from it. It grew out from his chest instead of his legs. I don't know refraction, the laws of light, all that technical stuff. All I know is that Fritz Gulther had a big black shadow sitting beside him on the floor, and that the sight of it sent cold shivers along my spine. I wasn't drunk. Neither was he. Neither was the shadow. All three of us existed. Now Gulther was putting his hat back on, but not the shadow. It just sat there, crouched. It was all wrong. The shadow was no denser at one spot than at another. It was evenly dark, and I noted this particularly. The outlines did not blur or fade. They were solid. I stared and stared. I saw a lot now I'd never noticed. The shadow wore no clothes, of course. Why should it put on a hat? It was naked, that shadow. But it belonged to Gulther. It wore spectacles. It was his shadow, all right, which suited me fine because I didn't want it. Fiddling around, compounding that sedative, I got in more peeks. Now Gulther was looking down over his shoulder. He was looking at his shadow now. Even from a distance, I fancied I saw new beads of sweat string a rosary of fear across his forehead. He knew all right. I came out, finally. Here it is, I said. I kept my eyes from his face.
Well, good. I hope it works. Must get some sleep. And say, that job offer still goes. How about coming down tomorrow morning?
I nodded, forcing a smile. Gulther paid me, rose.
See you then.
Certainly. Why not? After all, what if you do work for a boss with an unnatural shadow? Most bosses have other faults, worse ones, and more concrete. That shadow, whatever it was, and whatever was wrong with it, wouldn't bite me, though Gulther acted as though it might bite him. As he turned away, I looked at his departing back, and at the long, swooping black outline which followed it. The shadow rose and stalked after him. Stalked. Yes, it followed quite purposefully. To my now bewildered eyes, it seemed larger than it had in the tavern, larger and bolder black. Then the night swallowed Gulther and his non-existent companion. I went back to the rear of the store and swallowed the other half of the sedative I'd made up for that purpose. After seeing that shadow, I needed it as much as he did.
The girl in the ornate outer office smiled prettily. Go right in, she warbled. He's expecting you.
So it was true, then. Gulther was assistant research director, and I was to be his secretary. I floated in the morning sunshine. I forgot all about shadows. The inner office was elaborately furnished, a huge place with the elegant walnut paneling associated with business authority. There was a kidney desk set before closed Venetian blinds, and a variety of comfortable leather armchairs. Fluorescent lighting gleamed pleasantly. But there was no Gulther, probably on the other side of the little door at the back, talking to his chief. I sat down with a tight feeling of anticipation hugged somewhere within my stomach. I glanced around, taking in the room again. My gaze swept the glass-topped desk. It was bare, except in the corner where a small box of cigars rested. No, wait a minute, that wasn't a cigar box. It was metal. I'd seen it somewhere before. Of course! It was Gulther's iron-bound book, German Inorganic Chemistry. Who was I to doubt his word? So naturally, I just had to sneak a look before he came in. I opened the yellow pages. De Vermis Mysterious. Mysteries of the Worm. This was no inorganic chemistry text. It was something entirely different. Something that told you how you could compound aconite and belladonna and draw circles of phosphorescent fire on the floor when the stars were right. Something that spoke of melting tallow candles and blending them with corpse fat, whispered of the uses to which animal sacrifice might be put. It spoke of meetings that could be arranged with various parties most people don't either care to meet or even believe in. The thick black letters crawled across the pages, and the detestable odor arising from the musty thing formed a background for the nastiness of the text. I won't say whether or not I believed what I was reading, but I will admit that there was an air, a suggestion about those cold, deliberate directions for traffic with alien evil which made me shiver with repulsion. Such thoughts have no place in sanity, even as fantasy, and if this is what Gulther had done with the materials he'd bought himself for $2.39... Years of study, eh? Experiments? What was Gulther trying to call up? What did he call up? What bargain did he make? The man who could answer these questions sidled out from behind the door. Gone was the Fritz Gulther of the pinstripe suit personality. It was my original Casper Milquetoast who creased his mouth at me in abject fear. He looked like a man, I had to say it, who was afraid of his own shadow. The shadow trailed him through the doorway. To my eyes it had grown overnight. Its arms were slightly raised. The Gulther had both hands pressed against his sides. I saw it cross the wall as he walked towards me, and it moved more swiftly than he did. Make no mistake, I saw the shadow. Since then, I've talked to wise boys who assure me that even under fluorescence no shadow is cast. They're wise boys, all right. But I saw that shadow. Gulther saw that book in my hands. "All right," he said simply. "You know, and maybe it's just as well." "No?" "Yes. Know that I made a bargain with someone. I thought I was being smart. He promised me success and wealth, anything I wanted, on only one condition. Those damned conditions. You always read about them, and you always forget because they sound so foolish. He told me that I'd have only one rival, and that this rival would be a part of myself. It would grow with success." I sat mute. Gulther was wound up for a long time. Silly, wasn't it? Of course I accepted, and then I found out what my rival was, what it would be. This shadow of mine. It's independent of me, you know that, and it keeps growing. Oh, not in size, but in depth, in intensity. It's becoming, maybe I am crazy, but you see it too, more solid, thicker, as though it had palpable substance. Crease's mouth wobbled violently, but the words choked on. The further I go, the more it grows. Last night, I took your sedative and it didn't work. Didn't work at all. I sat up in the darkness and watched my shadow. In darkness? Yes. It doesn't need light. It really exists now, permanently. In the dark, it's just a blacker blur, but you can see it. It doesn't sleep or rest. It just waits. And you're afraid of it? Why? I don't know. It doesn't threaten me or make gestures or even take any notice of me. Shadows taking notice. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But you see it as I do. You can see it waiting. And that's what I'm afraid. What's it waiting for? The shadow crept closer over his shoulder, eavesdropping. I don't need you for a secretary. I need a nurse. What you need is a good rest. Rest? How can I rest? I just came out of Newsom's office. He doesn't notice anything yet. Too stupid, I suppose. The girls in the office look at me when I pass, and I wonder if they see something peculiar, but Newsom doesn't. He just made me head of research, completely in charge. In 5 days? Marvelous. Isn't it? Except for our bargain. Whenever I succeed, my rival gains power with me. That'll make the shadow stronger. How? I don't know. I'm waiting, and I can't find rest. I'll find it for you. Just lie down and wait. I'll be back. I left him hastily. Left him sitting at his desk all alone. Well, not quite alone. The shadow was there, too. Before I went, I had the funniest temptation. I wanted to run my hand along the wall through that shadow. And yet I didn't. It was too black, too solid. What if my hand should actually encounter something? So I just left. I was back in half an hour. I grabbed Gulther's arm, bared it, plunged the needle home. "Morphine," I whispered. "You'll sleep now." He did, resting on the leather sofa. I sat at his side, watching the shadow that didn't sleep. It stood there, towering above him unnaturally. I tried to ignore it, but it was a third party in the room. Once, when I turned back, it moved, began to pace up and down. I opened my mouth, trying to hold back a scream. The phone buzzed. I answered mechanically, my eyes never leaving the black outline on the wall that swayed over Gulther's recumbent form. "Yes? No, he's not in right now. This is Mr. Gulther's secretary speaking. Your message?" "Yes, I'll tell him. I certainly will. Thank you." It made a woman's voice, a deep, rich voice. Her message was to tell Mr. Gulther that she'd changed her mind. She'd be happy to meet him that evening at dinner. Another conquest for Fritz Gulther. Conquest. 2 conquests in a row. That meant conquest for the shadow, too. But how? I turned to the shadow on the wall and got a shock. It was lighter, grayer, thinner, wavering a little. What was wrong? I glanced down at Gulther's sleeping face, then I got another shock. Gulther's face was dark, not tanned, but dark, blackish, sooty, shadowy. Then I did scream, a little. Gulther awoke. I just pointed to his face and indicated the wall mirror. He almost fainted. "It's combining with me," he whispered. His skin was slate-colored. I turned my back because I couldn't look at him. We must do something," he mumbled. "Fast." "Perhaps if you were to use that book again, you could make another bargain." It was a fantastic idea, but it popped out. I faced Gulther again and saw him smile. "That's it. If you could get the materials now, you know what I need. Go to the drugstore, but hurry because—" I shook my head. Gulther was nebulous, shimmery. I saw him through a mist. Then I heard him yell, "You damned fool! Look at me! That's my shadow you're staring at!" I ran out of the room, and in less than 10 minutes I was trying to fill a vial with belladonna with fingers that trembled like lumps of jelly. I must have looked like a fool carrying that armful of packages to the outer office. Candles, chalk, phosphorus, aconite, belladonna, and blame it on my hysteria, the dead body of an alley cat I decoyed behind the store. Certainly I felt like a fool when Fritz Gulther met me at the door of his sanctum. "Come on in," he snapped. Yes. Snapped. It took only a glance to convince me that Gulther was himself again. Whatever the black change that frightened us so had been, he shook it off while I was gone. Once again, the trumpet voice held authority. Once again, the sneering smile replaced the apologetic crease in the mouth. Gulther's skin was white, normal. His movements were brisk and no longer frightened. He didn't need any wild spells, or had he ever really? Suddenly I felt as though I'd been a victim of my own imagination. After all, men don't make bargains with demons. They don't change places with their shadows. The moment Gulther closed the door, his words corroborated my mood. "Well, I've snapped out of it. Foolish nonsense, wasn't it?" He smiled easily. "Guess we won't need that junk after all. Right when you left, I began to feel better. Here, sit down and take it easy." I sat. Gulther rested on the desk, nonchalantly swinging his legs. "All that nervousness, that strain has disappeared. But before I forget it, I'd like to apologize for telling you that crazy story about sorcery and my obsession. Matter of fact, I'd feel better about the whole thing in the future if you just forgot that all this ever happened." I nodded. Gulther smiled again. "That's right. Now we're ready to get down to business. I tell you, it's a real relief to realize the progress we're going to make. I'm head research director already, and if I play my cards right, I think I'll be running this place in another 3 months. Some of the things Newsom told me today tipped me off, so just play ball with me, and we'll go a long way. A long way. And I can promise you one thing. I'll never have any of these crazy spells again." There was nothing wrong with what Gulther said here. Nothing wrong with any of it. There was nothing wrong with the way Gulther lolled and smiled at me either. Then why did I suddenly get that old crawling sensation along my spine? For a moment I couldn't place it, and then I realized. Fritz Gulther sat on his desk before the wall, but now he cast no shadow. No shadow. No shadow at all. A shadow had tried to enter the body of Fritz Gulther when I left. Now there was no shadow. Where had it gone? There was only one place for it to go. And if it had gone there, then where was Fritz Gulther? He read it in my eyes. I read it in his swift gesture. Gulther's hands dipped into his pocket and re-emerged. As it rose, I rose and sprang across the room. I gripped the revolver, pressed it back and away, and stared into his convulsed countenance, into his eyes. Behind the glasses, behind the human pupils, there was only a blackness. The cold, grinning blackness of a shadow. Then he snarled, arms clawing up as he tried to wrest the weapon free, aim it. His body was cold, curiously weightless, but filled with a slithering strength. I felt myself go limp under those icy, scrabbling talons, but as I gazed into those two dark pools of hate that were his eyes, fear and desperation lent me aid. A single gesture, and I turned the muzzle in. The gun exploded, and Gulther slumped to the floor. They crowded in then. They stood and stared down, too. We all stood and stared down at the body lying on the floor. Body? There was Fritz Gulther's shoes, his shirt, his tie, his expensive blue pinstripe suit. The toes of the shoes pointed up, the shirt and tie and suit were creased and filled out to support a body beneath. But there was no body on the floor. There was only a shadow, a deep, black shadow encased in Fritz Gulther's clothes. Nobody said a word for a long time. Then one of the girls whispered, "Look, it's just a shadow." I bent down quickly and shook the clothes. As I did so, the shadow seemed to move beneath my fingers, to move and to melt. In an instant, it slithered free from the garments. There was a flash, or a final retinal impression of blackness, and the shadow was gone. The clothing sagged down into an empty, huddled heap on the floor. I rose and faced them. I couldn't say it loud, but I could say it gratefully, very gratefully. "No," I said. "You're mistaken. There's no shadow there. There's nothing at all. Absolutely nothing at all."
Well done. You've survived not one, but two stories. What did you think of What Every Young Ghoul Should Know and Black Bargain by Robert Bloch? If you're a Patreon subscriber, we encourage you to pop over to our Discord channel and tell us. So, appetizer, entree, and now dessert. That's me. Hello! Cue some sort of bad joke about being very sweet. Our first story today, What Every Young Ghoul Should Know, is a fun little meta piece. Whomst amongst writers has not felt a teeny tiny twinge of frustration after a rejection? Of course, we all know we must be professional and acknowledge that that particular story just wasn't a good fit for that particular editor. Remind ourselves it's not personal, pick ourselves up and live to submit another day. Of course. But, if you could send that person who dared to dislike your precious baby story to the moon while cackling maniacally, well, that would be quite fun, wouldn't it? It would. You can tell me. I promise not to tell any other editors. Honest. Or, to come to our second story, Black Bargain. Perhaps, in frustration, or even desperation, you might be tempted to sell your soul to the devil, or a demon you've just summoned, maybe, with tincture of aconite, which, by the way, is a neurotoxin made from the plant monkshood, and some belladonna, a cat, of course, nightshade, some phosphorus. Before you know it, you could have sold the story and have a flashy suit, with not even the tiniest of collar gaps, sorry, that's an extremely online reference, and some stylish handmade shoes. Look, you might end up being stalked by a terrifyingly large demonic shadow, but hey, you've been published, right? And this is where, just for a moment, I'm going to take this seriously. It's an old tale, easy success, wealth, anything you want, but it comes with a cost, a dark side. And that dark side is part of yourself. And because of that, as you grow, it grows. And eventually, it takes over. I've talked before about focusing on a specific goal and not what comes after, or even, actually, what comes before. you think you'll be happy once you've made the money if you could just be acknowledged, have your name on the cover of the book, win the prestigious awards, do the thing. And you know you might be happy if you earn it all the long way, with hard work and caffeine and sweat and probably tears. But if these things are unearned, if you take shortcuts, if you do it by cheating, even if other people don't know, the shadow knows. And it gets more and more enormous, and you end up hating it a little bit more each day, and so hating yourself a little bit more each day. Ghoul comes to a sticky end in this story. Well, it is a horror story. In real life, there are different choices. First, instead of looking for shortcuts, for looking for ways to cheat, whether that's using AI, which is cheap these days, or paying a human to do it for you, which is more expensive, but either way, lying about who did the actual work. Instead of that, just collaborate honestly with people. Human people, I want to stress, AI can get in the bin, and fairly credit their input. And secondly, hey, mistakes are human, but admit your mistakes. Take responsibility. People respect that more than you realise. Because if you have made the wrong choice and the shadow has taken hold, well, one surefire way to steal the power of the shadow is to shine a light onto it. And the people who are telling you stop looking for easy answers and go away and do the goddamn work, get better, well, instead of sending them to the moon where you never have to hear them, maybe listen. The reality is there are no shortcuts, no dark deals, not safe ones. Anyway, there's only hard graft and learning things and practice, making your own art and trusting yourself because you've learned enough to know you can. When you succeed that way, well, imposter syndrome might still be a thing, but deep down, you know you've earned it. And then there is no shadow. And now, to the subject of subscribing and support. PseudoPod is funded by you, our listeners, and we're now formally a non-profit. One-time donations are gratefully received and much appreciated, but what really makes a difference is subscribing. A $5 monthly donation on Patreon will go further than you would believe. Subscribers give us way more than money. They give us stability, reliability, and dependability. And monthly donations give PseudoPod a well-maintained tower from which to operate. Which is good for you because you don't want things getting out through our tower walls. If you can, please go to pseudopod.org and sign up by clicking on Feed the Pod. If you have any questions about how to support EA and ways to give, please reach out to us at donations@escapeartists.net. And if you can't afford to support us financially, and we understand, then please consider leaving reviews of our episodes or generally talking about them on whichever form of social media seems the least terrible this week. We'd love it if you looked us up on Blue Sky, find us at pseudopod.org. If you like merch, Escape Artists also has a Void merch store with a huge range of hoodies and t-shirts and other bits and pieces. The link is in various places, including our pinned tweet and the latest Blue Sky post. Check it out. PseudoPod is part of the Escape Artists Foundation, a 501c3 non-profit, and this episode is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Download and listen to the episode on any device you like, but don't change it or sell it. Theme music is by permission of Anders Manga. Next week we have Beach Head by Daniel the Mole, narrated by Trendane Sparks. And finally, PseudoPod and Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman know they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. This is not actually true. The road to hell is paved with frozen door-to-door salesmen. On weekends, many of the younger demons go ice skating down it. See you soon, folks. Take care. Mind how you go.
An arm appeared from nowhere on the shape, seemingly projected like the PseudoPod of a protozoan.
It's a pseudopod. It's a big foot.
It's all about podcasts these days.